Victor Hensley adjusted his cuffs, the polished steel of the Galactic Council chamber reflecting the cold light from the crystalline chandeliers above. Every step he took toward the central dais seemed to echo louder than the last, each sound swallowed by the vastness of the room. Towering figures from a dozen alien species watched him, their inscrutable expressions magnified by the heightened gravity of the moment. The Galactic Emperor, Lord Garvos, reclined in his throne at the head of the chamber, a grotesque amalgamation of flowing metallic scales and biosynthetic implants. His golden eyes burned with disdain as they fixed on Victor, as though the human diplomat was an insect daring to crawl into the Empire's inner sanctum. The moment was tense, suffocating, and silent, save for the faint hum of alien machinery. "You are late," Garvos growled, his voice reverberating through the chamber with a guttural resonance that sent shivers down Victor's spine. Victor inclined his head, his expression unreadable. "Apologies, Your Eminence. Humanity's journeys, unlike your vast empires, lack the luxury of instantaneous travel." There was a ripple of derisive laughter from the council members seated in their elevated tiers. Victor stood his ground, his calm demeanor a thin veneer over his tightly wound nerves. Behind his stoic exterior, he analyzed the room. Rows of predatory gazes, beings with centuries of power and dominion etched into every line of their alien visages. He knew what was coming, though the specifics remained unclear. And yet, he also knew he had no choice but to be here. The Emperor raised a long, clawed hand to silence the murmurs. "You speak boldly for a representative of a species still crawling from its primordial muck. Humanity has been evaluated. You are a rudimentary race, weak and unworthy of the galaxy's gifts." Victor allowed himself a faint smile. "We've found our existence satisfying enough without the galaxy's oversight." Garvos's expression tightened, his golden eyes narrowing. "And yet, your insolence has brought you here. The Galactic Empire demands tribute, 20% of your planet's resources annually, raw materials, energy, and labor. Refuse, and we will demonstrate why inferior species, such as yours, do not survive defiance." A low murmur swept through the chamber. Victor's heart pounded, but outwardly he remained calm. He shifted his weight slightly, positioning himself as if casually at ease, though his every muscle screamed to flee. The recording device in his pocket was active, cataloging every word and nuance of this meeting. It was a gamble, one that could mean the survival or destruction of humanity. "Tribute," Victor said after a measured pause, his voice steady. A word drenched in history, often demanded by those who fear rebellion. The Emperor's claws flexed, scraping against the armrest of his throne. "Do not mistake our patience for leniency, human. Your kind has no history here, no allies. You are a pebble beneath our boot." Victor's gaze swept across the council chamber, meeting the cold stares of its members. He could see it in their eyes, contempt, curiosity, and, in a few rare cases, a flicker of intrigue. He leaned forward, his voice dropping just enough to command attention. "Humanity has survived against odds stacked impossibly high. We have weathered extinction events, civil wars, and catastrophes of our own making. And through it all, we've learned one truth. Survival is not a gift. It is earned." The chamber was deathly silent, the weight of his words hanging in the air. A creature with translucent skin and swirling internal fluids leaned closer to another alien, whispering in a language Victor couldn't understand. He knew he was walking a razor's edge. One wrong word, and the Empire's wrath would descend on Earth without hesitation. Garvos rose from his throne, his towering frame casting a long shadow that stretched toward Victor. "You speak bravely for a species with no fleet, no advanced weapons, no allies. Tell me, Ambassador, what delusion convinces you that defiance is anything but suicide?" Victor tilted his head slightly, a gesture that was half challenge, half deflection. "Perhaps it is the same delusion that built your empire, a belief in the impossible." A low growl rumbled from Garvos's chest, but before he could respond, One of the counselors, a tall, avian-like being with feathers of iridescent green, interjected. "Enough of this posturing," it said in a sharp, clicking voice. "The Empire has spoken. What is your answer, human?" Victor straightened, his gaze unwavering. "Humanity does not pay tribute." The declaration landed like a thunderclap. The chamber erupted in a cacophony of outrage and disbelief. Victor stood ghost, his heart hammering as the weight of his words solidified in the air. He could see Garvos's claws tightening around the edges of his throne, his golden eyes burning with fury. "Then humanity will burn," Garvos hissed, his voice low and venomous. "Your insolence will serve as a lesson to all who dare defy the Empire." Victor inclined his head in a mock bow, his every movement deliberate. Perhaps it will serve as a lesson to those who underestimate us." Without waiting for permission, Victor turned and began walking toward the exit. The air seemed to crackle with restrained violence, but no move was made to stop him. Every step felt heavier than the last, the enormity of what had just transpired pressing down on him. As the grand doors of the chamber closed behind him, Victor allowed himself a single, deep breath. His calm implant buzzed faintly in his ear as the voice of Admiral Derek Sloan crackled through. "Well," Victor's lips twitched into a grim smile. "It's war." Victor Hensley stood before the United Earth Council, his expression composed despite the storm brewing around him. The chamber buzzed with tension as representatives from every nation and colony on Earth debated furiously. Their voices overlapped, an orchestra of fear and defiance. The Empire's ultimatum had ignited a firestorm of conflicting emotions: outrage, panic, and a faint, fragile hope that this moment might be the one to unify humanity. At the heart of it all, Victor remained silent, letting the chaos unfold. His mind replayed the encounter with Lord Garvos, every word of the Emperor's disdain fueling his resolve. Finally, when the cacophony reached its peak, Victor raised a hand, the simple gesture silencing the room. "We don't have time for this," he said, his voice cutting through the tension like a blade. "The Empire isn't waiting for our decision. Their fleet is already mobilizing." An older representative, her face lined with years of diplomacy and doubt, leaned forward. "And what do you propose, Ambassador? That we fight a war we cannot possibly win? Have you seen the size of their armada?" "I have," Victor replied evenly. "And I've also seen what we're capable of when our backs are against the wall." The murmurs began again, quieter this time, more contemplative. From the far end of the table, Admiral Derek Sloan spoke, his deep voice carrying the weight of command. "Victor's right. We've been preparing for this moment, whether we wanted to admit it or not." All eyes turned to the Admiral. Sloan's presence was magnetic, his sharp blue eyes and imposing frame commanding respect. He had the air of someone who had faced impossible odds before and lived to tell the tale. "For decades, we've been watching the stars, knowing this day might come. We've developed weapons, ships, and tactics in secret, enough to give us a fighting chance." "Chance?" scoffed a younger representative, his tone laced with incredulity. "You're betting the survival of our species on a chance." Sloan's gaze locked onto the man, unflinching. "Survival isn't guaranteed. It never has been. But I'd rather bet on human ingenuity and resilience than bow to an empire that sees us as little more than animals." Victor stepped forward again, his voice steady. "The Empire believes we're weak because we're fractured. They see us as a collection of nations, not a united species. This is our opportunity to prove them wrong. If we don't fight now, we'll never get another chance." The room fell into a tense silence. Victor scanned the faces before him, searching for the flicker of resolve he knew was there. Slowly, one by one, the representatives began to nod. Across the room, Dr. Arthur Caldwell adjusted his glasses and cleared his throat. The scientist, with his wiry frame and perpetually disheveled hair, seemed an unlikely figure in this war council, but his mind was as sharp as any blade. "If I may," he began, drawing the room's attention. The key to our strategy lies in technology the Empire doesn't expect us to have. A holographic display flickered to life in the center of the room, showing schematics of sleek, angular ships bristling with advanced weaponry. Project Nemesis, Caldwell explained. A fleet of AI-assisted stealth vessels designed to operate undetected behind enemy lines. We've been working on them in secret for years, and they're finally operational. If used correctly, they could give us the edge we need. The hologram shifted, showing a simulation of the Nemesis fleet infiltrating an enemy armada, disabling key ships before retreating unseen. The room watched in silence, the potential of this technology slowly sinking in. Sloan crossed his arms, a faint smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. It's risky, but it's the kind of risk we need to take. The Empire's strength lies in overwhelming force. If we can disrupt their command structure, we can level the playing field. Victor nodded, his mind already racing with the implications. And while the Nemesis fleet buys us time, we can rally our remaining forces to defend Earth and its colonies. Every day we hold them off is a day we show the galaxy that humanity won't bow. The representatives began to murmur again, this time with a different tone. The fear was still there, but it was joined by something else. Determination. Victor could feel the tide shifting, the room beginning to align behind a singular purpose. One of the older representatives, his voice weary but ghost, spoke up. If we do this, it has to be all or nothing. No half measures. No hesitation. Agreed, Victor said. He turned to Sloan and Caldwell. We need a comprehensive plan. Mobilize the Nemesis fleet immediately. Prepare our defenses and ensure the colonies are ready to evacuate if necessary. Caldwell nodded, already typing furiously on a datapad. Sloan turned to leave, his stride purposeful, but paused at the doorway. Victor, he said, his voice softer than before, you've done your part. Now let us handle the rest. Victor met his gaze, understanding the weight of those words. He nodded, but as Sloan left, he felt the weight of responsibility settle heavier on his shoulders. Hours later, Victor found himself alone in a darkened room, staring out at the stars. The vastness of space seemed to mock him, a reminder of the Empire's overwhelming power. He clenched his fists, his jaw tight. A soft chime interrupted his thoughts. The comm screen in the corner of the room flickered to life, displaying the face of a young officer. Sir, we've detected movement near the outer colonies. The Empire's fleet is advancing. Victor's heart sank, though his voice remained steady. Understood. Alert Admiral Sloan and Dr. Caldwell. Tell them it's time. The officer nodded and disappeared, leaving Victor alone with the enormity of what lay ahead. He took a deep breath, his mind racing through everything that had been said and done. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and facing an enemy that saw them as nothing more than insects to be crushed. But they had something the Empire didn't expect. The unyielding will of a species that refused to give up. Victor straightened, his shoulders squared. He would do whatever it took to ensure humanity's survival, no matter the cost. The darkness of space lit up with streaks of crimson and blue as the Galactic Empire's fleet descended upon Earth's outer defenses. The first assault came like a tidal wave, relentless and overwhelming, tearing through the unmanned orbital stations and automated weapon platforms that had been designed only to buy time. From his command chair aboard the flagship Ghost, Admiral Derek Sloan watched the unfolding chaos on the tactical display. Outer grid collapsing, reported Lieutenant Devon Moore, his voice tense but steady. We've lost platforms Gamma 7 through 12. Enemy vessels advancing at full thrust. Sloan leaned forward, his sharp eyes narrowing as he studied the holographic display. The Empire's ships were enormous, bristling with weapons that could obliterate entire cities in seconds. Against them, humanity's fleet appeared almost insignificant, a ragtag force of hastily retrofitted warships and experimental designs. But Sloan knew better than to underestimate his own forces. Hold formation, he ordered, his voice cutting through the tension on the bridge. Wait for them to cross into the second grid. Then we hit them with everything we've got. Across the bridge, officers moved with precision, their fear tempered by Sloane's commanding presence. They trusted him, not because he promised victory, but because he inspired them to fight for something larger than themselves. As the Empire's fleet drew closer, Earth's ships unleashed their first coordinated assault. Plasma cannons roared, missile salvos streaked through the void, and the vacuum of space came alive with deadly firepower. Several enemy frigates exploded under the barrage, their destruction sending shockwaves through the surrounding vessels. Direct hits on targets Beta and Epsilon, Moore called out, a rare note of triumph in his voice. Sloane nodded but didn't smile. The Empire's counterattack was swift and merciless. Beams of concentrated energy lanced through the void, carving through human ships with surgical precision. The Endeavor, a destroyer stationed near the front lines, was struck head-on, its hull disintegrating in a fiery burst. The loss sent a ripple of grief through the fleet, but there was no time to mourn. On board the stealth frigate Vanguard, Captain Elias Graves watched the battle from a far more perilous vantage point. His ship was part of Project Nemesis, one of the experimental vessels designed to operate undetected within enemy formations. Cloaked by advanced optical and electronic countermeasures, the Vanguard and its sister ships weaved through the chaos like ghosts. Target acquired, Graves said, his voice low and steady as the ship approached the Empire's flagship. Prepare the disruptor payload. Behind him, his crew worked in silence, their faces grim with concentration. The disruptor was their ace in the hole, a weapon capable of temporarily disabling the Empire's advanced shielding systems. If deployed successfully, it could turn the tide of the battle. Payload ready, his weapons officer confirmed. Fire. A shimmering burst of energy erupted from the Vanguard, striking the Empire's flagship squarely. For a moment, its shields flickered, and in that fleeting window of vulnerability, humanity's fleet pounced. Missiles and plasma bolts slammed into the flagship, leaving scorch marks across its pristine hull. Direct hit on the flagship. Moore's voice crackled through the comms on the Ghost. Their shields are down. Press the advantage. Sloane barked. Concentrate fire on their command ship. The human fleet surged forward, their collective firepower focused on the wounded flagship. It was a rare moment of triumph, but it was fleeting. The Empire's fleet retaliated with renewed ferocity, their sheer numbers beginning to overwhelm the human forces. Back on Earth, Victor Hensley watched the battle unfold through a live tactical feed. The room around him was a hive of activity, filled with military strategists and communications officers. Victor felt the weight of every loss as if it were his own, but he forced himself to remain composed. Update from the colonies, a young officer reported. Evacuations are underway, but they're running out of time. Victor's jaw tightened. Admiral Sloane needs more support. What's the status of the second wave? Dr. Arthur Caldwell, standing nearby, looked up from his console. The second wave is armed and ready, but they'll take time to reach the front lines. If the Nemesis fleet can hold out just a little longer, Victor nodded. Then we have a chance. On the Ghost, Sloane knew they were running out of both time and ships. The Empire's fleet was relentless, their formations tightening around the human forces like a noose. The losses were mounting, but retreat wasn't an option. Admiral, came a voice from his comms. It was Captain Graves, his tone urgent. The Nemesis fleet is in position to make a second strike on their command ship, but we'll need cover. Can you buy us time? Sloane didn't hesitate. We'll hold the line. Make it count, Captain. The Ghost surged forward, its engines roaring as it positioned itself between the Empire's flagship and the rest of the human fleet. Sloane's crew worked tirelessly, their every action driven by the knowledge that failure wasn't an option. The Vanguard and its sister ships launched their second strike, this time targeting the Empire's flagship's engines. The disruptor payload hit its mark, sending a cascade of explosions rippling across the ship's stern. For a brief, shining moment, It seemed as though victory was within reach. But the Empire wasn't finished. From the depths of their formation, a massive dreadnought emerged, its colossal frame dwarfing every other ship in the battle. Its weapons charged with an ominous glow, and Sloane knew immediately that it was a game-changer. "Admiral, the dreadnought is targeting the Ghost," Moore warned, his voice tight with fear. Sloane clenched his fists. "All power to shields. We're not backing down." The dreadnought fired, a beam of searing energy tearing through the void. The Ghost shuddered under the impact, its shields barely holding. The damage was catastrophic, but the ship remained intact, its crew fighting with every ounce of resolve they had left. On the Vanguard, Graves watched the dreadnoughts approach with grim determination. "We've done our part," he said, his voice heavy. "Now it's up to the fleet." The battle raged on, humanity's forces battered but unbroken. Sloane's gamble had paid off. Graves and the Nemesis fleet had delivered a crippling blow to the Empire's flagship. But the cost had been high, and the fight was far from over. As the Ghost limped away from the front lines, Sloane allowed himself a moment to catch his breath. "Status report," he demanded, his voice hoarse but ghost. Moore glanced at his console, then looked up with a grim expression. "The flagship is heavily damaged, but the dreadnought is still operational. We've lost over half our fleet." Sloane nodded slowly, his jaw set. "Then we'll make the rest count." Far away, on Earth, Victor Hensley watched the tactical feed as the human fleet regrouped for a desperate final stand. He knew the battle wasn't just about survival. It was about proving to the galaxy that humanity was more than the Empire believed. And as the battered ships of Earth's fleet turned to face the enemy once more, Victor felt a spark of hope. They weren't finished yet. The Ghost drifted at the edge of the battlefield, its once pristine hull a testament to the ferocity of the Empire's assault. Admiral Derek Sloane stood on the bridge, his uniform scorched, his face smeared with soot and blood. The command deck was eerily quiet, save for the hum of emergency systems and the occasional burst of static from damaged comm channels. They had held the line, but the cost had been devastating. "Status?" Sloane asked, his voice a rough rasp that carried the weight of exhaustion and unyielding resolve. Lieutenant Moore, his arm in a makeshift sling, glanced at the tactical display. "Enemy flagship crippled, but their dreadnought is advancing toward Earth orbit. Our fleet is down to 23 operational ships. The Nemesis vessels are regrouping, but their cloaking systems are compromised." Sloane nodded, his mind racing. The dreadnought loomed on the tactical map, a behemoth of destruction poised to end everything they had fought to protect. If it reached Earth, no amount of preparation would stop the devastation it would unleash. "We can't let that thing make orbit," Sloane said, his voice steely. "Prepare the Ghost for a direct assault." The bridge crew exchanged uneasy glances, but none dared question him. They had seen Sloane defy impossible odds before. If this was his final gambit, they would follow him to the end. As the Ghost powered up its remaining systems, Victor Hensley's face appeared on the comm screen, his expression grim but determined. "Derek, what are you doing?" "What has to be done," Sloane replied, his tone leaving no room for debate. "The Nemesis fleet bought us time, but it's not enough. That dreadnought is the key. If we take it out, we break their advance." Victor's jaw tightened. "You can't go alone. There has to be another way." "There isn't," Sloane said firmly. "This isn't about one ship or one man. This is about making sure humanity gets a fighting chance." Victor stared at him, the weight of their shared responsibility hanging heavy between them. Finally, he gave a small, reluctant nod. "We'll back you up with everything we've got. Good luck." "Derek." The comm screen went dark, and Sloane turned to his crew. "You heard the man. This is it. All power to engines. Prepare for maximum thrust." The Ghost surged forward, its engines roaring as it accelerated toward the dreadnought. The distance closed rapidly, the sheer scale of the enemy ship becoming more daunting with every passing second. The dreadnought bristled with weaponry, its glowing cannons already charging to fire. Evasive maneuvers, Sloan ordered. Keep us moving. We can't afford to take a direct hit. The Ghost weaved through the enemy's fire, its smaller, battered frame managing to outmaneuver the Dreadnought's slower targeting systems. Sloan's crew worked tirelessly, their fear channeled into precise action. Plasma bolts streaked past the ship, some close enough to scorch the hull, but the Ghost pressed on. On the Vanguard, Captain Elias Graves watched the battle unfold, his jaw clenched. The stealth fleet had suffered heavy losses, but their mission wasn't over. The Nemesis ships, though damaged, regrouped for one final strike. Signal the fleet, Graves said. We're targeting the Dreadnought's power core. If we can disable it, the Ghost might stand a chance. The Vanguard and its remaining allies cloaked themselves as best they could and moved into position. Their disruptor payloads were depleted, but they still had missiles and plasma cannons. Graves knew it wasn't enough to destroy the Dreadnought outright, but it might be enough to weaken it. Fire everything we've got, Graves ordered, his voice steady despite the odds. The Nemesis fleet unleashed a coordinated assault, their weapons striking the Dreadnought's vulnerable sections. Explosions rippled across the massive ship's surface, disrupting its shields and causing its weapon systems to falter. It wasn't a decisive blow, but it was enough to create an opening. Admiral, the Nemesis fleet has weakened their defenses. Moore called out on the Ghost. We've got a shot at the core. Sloan's eyes hardened. Then let's finish this. Bring us in close. Target their power core. The Ghost dove toward the Dreadnought, its weapons blazing. The enemy's ship retaliated, its cannons lighting up the void with deadly precision. The Ghost shook violently under the assault, alarms blaring as the hull buckled and systems failed. But Sloan refused to falter. Target locked. Moore shouted, "Firing now!" The Ghost's final salvo struck the Dreadnought's core, a blinding explosion consuming the enemy ship's central structure. For a moment, it seemed as though the Dreadnought might recover, its weapons still firing sporadically. But then, with a deafening roar, the core detonated in a chain reaction, tearing the ship apart from within. The shockwave rocked the Ghost, sending it spinning through the debris field. Sloan gripped the armrest of his chair, his knuckles white. "Damage report," he barked. "Critical systems failing," Moore said, his voice strained. "We're venting atmosphere. Engines offline." Sloan took a deep breath, his gaze fixed on the burning remains of the Dreadnought. They had done it. Against all odds, they had stopped the Empire's most powerful weapon. But the cost had been high. "Send a message to the fleet," Sloan said, his voice soft but firm. "Let them know the Dreadnought is down. Tell them humanity is still standing." As the message went out, cheers erupted across the remaining ships. The Empire's forces, stunned by the loss of their flagship and Dreadnought, began to retreat. Humanity's battered fleet held their ground, their defiance shining brighter than the stars. On Earth, Victor Hensley watched the retreat with a mixture of relief and sorrow. The battle was won, but the war was far from over. They had proven their strength, but they had also drawn the Empire's full attention. The fight for survival would continue, but for the first time they had hope. Victor's comm screen lit up with a message from Sloan's ship. The Admiral's voice, though faint, carried the same unwavering resolve as always. "We made them bleed, Victor. Now it's your turn to make them think twice." Victor nodded, his jaw set. "We'll be ready, Derek. I promise you that." Above the planet, the stars burned bright, the remnants of battle fading into the void. Humanity had stood on the brink of annihilation and refused to fall. They had earned their place among the stars, not as subjects, but as equals. And though the road ahead was uncertain, one thing was clear: humanity would not bow.